Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr. This is episode 402 of CryptoBiography, and it's part 2 of Sleepflying. And here we go. While she waited, she researched several things. One was falling. She'd heard that judo masters could fall without hurting themselves, even when they were being thrown by another judo master, meaning without controlling their fall. And also there were stuntmen who knew how to fall safely, and there was parkour. She watched a lot of videos and got some ideas, but mostly understood that to learn to fall, she would have to actually fall a lot. Still, she had some ideas of what to do. It was time to experiment. First of all, she wanted to see if she had any conscious control over her flight. After lunch, she went up and lay down on her bed. She didn't fall asleep. Rather, she thought about floating, about flying, about becoming weightless, but nothing happened. Damn, she thought. She didn't have a lot of good ways to tie herself down, but she finally took a robe belt, tied it securely around the bed frame, and tied the other end around her ankle. She knew that it might make her float off the side of the bed and make her falling harder, but she also hoped that she might notice it earlier. Also, she would not be able to float even a meter off the bed, as the belt was only so long. Finally, she put extra cushioning on the floor on that side, as she presumably wouldn't be falling on the other side of the bed. She lay back down and thought about flying. She didn't float, but eventually she drifted off into a nap. When she was nearly fully asleep, she felt herself lift off the bed. She tried not to wake up, but to keep her semi-somnolescence in place. I love that word. She was still floating. Now she could feel the rope around her ankle tighten as she reached its full extent. She could tell that her head was now rising above the level of her ankle. She was no longer horizontal. The change in pitch woke her up, and she thudded to the bed, fortunately, harmlessly. Still, she was excited. She had finally learned something about this strange phenomenon. She tried falling back asleep, but was too excited. She would need to be sure, but if she had to be asleep or drowsy to start floating, at the very least, it meant her life back. She could go around outside without worrying she would go to the upper atmosphere, or simply go so high that she would suddenly fall to her death. She tried again. Due to her excitement, it was very hard falling asleep on purpose, even though she was tired. But after an hour, part of her could feel her body rising above the mattress, bringing the sheet with it. This time, she managed not to wake up. She kept her dreamy, part-asleep state. She had not been a lucid dreamer before. She had heard that it was, for some people, a skill that could be mastered, but she'd never tried. She knew how to reason to try. She enjoyed the gentleness of the floating. She was not afraid of falling, at least not under her current circumstances, so the fear did not wake her. Instead, she felt herself bobbing around at the end of her robe belt rope. After a while, she noted something else. She wasn't rising up, head above her tethered ankle. Instead, she was staying level. Part of her thrilled at what that meant. It meant that, on some level, she could control her floating. And if she was controlling it, she wasn't just floating. She was flying. She enjoyed the idea a bit longer. Then she knew she would have to push things just a bit further. She opened her eyes, just a little. Her head was turned to the side, and though nothing was under it, it did not feel heavy, like her head would feel if she, say, was lying on her back with her head off the bed and trying to keep it level with her neck. No, it was just comfortably horizontal. That was an interesting feeling. So apparently her entire body was acting as though it were all about as light as air. So when she opened her eyes to slits, she mostly just saw her drapes, and at the sides of her vision, the bed and a bit of the floor on one side, and the ceiling on the other. It was a delightful feeling. Could she make herself lighter or heavier? She tried. In her half-asleep daze, it seemed to work. She made herself sink until she touched the bed. Happily, the feeling did not jolt her awake. Then she rose higher and higher, though with her ankle tied, she did start to slant upward, her head much higher than her foot. She was nearly vertical, when her hair brushed the ceiling. It was a wonderful feeling, and didn't wake her fully either. And that's the end of the episode for this week. Obviously, there's going to be more to the story. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, cryptobiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Blue Sky or Mastodon. We are no longer on Twitter. Thank you for listening. Words and Music copyright 2025, Brandon Starr, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.